Hello there, everyone. How are you? And are you ready for all the back to school sales? Or maybe your children are getting ready or groaning already about going back to school. Maybe you're groaning about going back to school, but it's getting to be that time of year. I'm amazed where it happened. It's like, where did the summer go? Anyway, today I'm looking at a section I saw again in this book I talked about before, and I'll probably do some more things about How We Learn by Benedict Carey. But there were some things in here that talked about forgetting and memory that I thought I'd like to discuss before, or again, rather. I did discuss some time ago the forgetting curve by Ebbinghaus, which I just realized I should have done a little graphic here. But that was a curve that Ebbinghaus did, I don't know, 150 years ago or something like that, in which he learned a bunch of nonsense syllables and then tried to track about how far and how long it took to forget them, which somewhat goes like this. This is time. Well, yeah, time. And it basically says that the longer you've got from the time you learned it, the less likely you are going to be pulling it back. Now, this was a famous and pretty much in early psychology, just about everybody knew about it. It wasn't necessarily popular during all the 1900s because there are different schools of psychology that got involved. But the Ebbinghaus curve or the forgetting curve has stood the test of time. The thing about this particular curve, however, is that the key word is nonsense syllables. So what Ebbinghaus did is he studied a bunch of words that didn't make sense to him. He could have picked up syllables. What he did is he took three letters. He took consonants and then stuck a vowel in the middle of it. So you could have put something like NOP or LGB, well, except that's not a vowel in the middle, but he created a bunch of nonsense syllables and then studied those and memorized those and see how long it took to memorize them and how long it took to forget them. Now, the problem in the nonsense syllables, some of those might mean something to you if you happen to have a series of initials that does something to your work, and then you're more likely to remember that than if it's just a bunch of three letters. What people have been looking at in the last, say, 50 years is something to the effect of what happens with material that we know. For example, if you can remember way back when in ancient history when you learned the capitals, the states and their capitals. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to remember all of them. So in one sense, to some degree, when you first started that, if you were in, say, third grade or fourth grade and none of those states meant anything to you, they were probably the equivalent of nonsense syllables. You didn't really remember them at all. Once you got to the point of recognizing, oh, you might have a grandmother that lived in a state and you knew somebody else here and you used to live in that state, then the material became more meaningful and you were more likely to remember it. I could turn around and say, does anybody here remember the capital of Nebraska? At which point, those of you who live in Nebraska will probably be able to answer that question. You might have to think about it sometimes. And those of you who don't or haven't thought about it for years are going to have trouble pulling this up. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. But the idea is that you're more likely to remember something over time if it's meaningful to you. And if it's not meaningful to you, it's pretty much going to fit that learning curve and it's going to be gone, which I think makes sense to you. The thing about it is that's what many of you anyway, let me say, did this in school. You'd study for a test, you'd get it, you took the test and then did a brain dump and with the idea that never seeing it again. Well, we've got two psychologists at UCLA, and I'm hoping I pronounced the name right. O-R-K, Bjork is the way I think it goes, but forgive me if it's totally wrong. And if you do know how to pronounce it, please let me know. Anyway, what they're doing is looking at the concept that memory and forgetting or items in our head have some concepts called storage retrieval or storage memory or storage depth and retrieval strength. Storage strength and retrieval strength. Sorry, there we go. Now, first of all, the idea is that as far as anybody can tell, the mind has got a totally limitless ability to remember things. Assuming, of course, that we've got and know what we're putting it in and can itemize it. But if, in a sense, this makes sense, if you've ever read of anybody who's 100 years old or 105 or whatever it is, the oldest person alive, it's not like they reached a birthday and suddenly it's like, I can't remember anything because I've got a door slammed in my face. They can go on and they can learn and add to whatever it is they already know. As far as we know, the mind is limitless as far as what you can put in. The problem is, for most of us, as you well know, is being able to pull that up when you want to. Sometimes maybe forgetting it, perhaps, could be. And this is where the concept of storage strength and retrieval strength comes in. Storage strength means how well it's, in a sense, stored into your head and available to be retrieved. So this is going to be something that perhaps could be the name of your parents, the name of your first address, something that you remembered a long time ago that was really important to you, and you've still got it. I've still got telephone numbers. I've got addresses and things that I knew when I was like 6 and 7. I can start to say I can remember the name of my first grade teacher, but right at this moment, I'm drawing a blank on that. But I can remember my second grade teacher, Miss Dickensheets. That was a long time ago, folks. But this is the kind of information that is considered to be strong storage material, because if I've got the right cues, I can pull that up. A retrieval issue is how difficult is it for you to pull that up? In a sense, the name of my first grade teacher, which again, I can't remember because I'm trying to think about it, but it will come up to me later, is going to be something that's more difficult for you to pull up. And so you could have something that's got a high storage strength, in a sense, like the name of my first grade teacher, because I know it, I know it, I'm just not pulling it up right at the moment. But the retrieval strength doesn't necessarily have to be really strong. It could be really, really weak. Say, pulling up, as I gave the example, the state capital for Nebraska might have some level of good storage strength because you did put it into your head at some point in time and you did know it. Now, the assumption I have to say here, the caveat, is that at one point in time you did know it. If you did sort of like learn it for 30 minutes and then got rid of it, I remember when I was in 7th grade and we had to learn poems, and then I would learn a poem and say it the next day, and then after that, by the end of the day, I'd totally forget it. On the other hand, there are a couple of poems that I learned that I still remember. So I can take a look and say that the storage strength, because I like those poems for whatever reason at that point in time, so the storage strength is good because I can still remember it. But the retrieval strength is not necessarily as good, because what you need with the retrieval strength is the right cues to be able to pull it back. So, for example, with my first grade teacher, which I can't use right now because now that I'm talking about it, it's not going to work, but you know how that goes. If I had the right set of cues, if I could see something that connected X with Y with Z and did all of that little stuff around, that sooner or later it would come up and I would remember to pull up her name. On another example, which is probably a little closer to home, let's just say you walked in the house and you now can't find your keys. So you've got your storage strength, it's because you know that they're in the house someplace, but your retrieval strength is not good. So what you have to do is you start looking for the cues. It's like, okay, did I open the door? Did I walk into the house and did I open the door? Or did somebody walk in the door with me and they opened the house? So then you've got a couple of things to work on. If they were in my hands when I walked in the door because I opened the door, then you can start thinking in terms of, okay, what did I did and where do I go? And figuring out where the keys are from there. If somebody else came in with you and opened the door and then you can't figure out where you last held your keys, the retrieval strength is going to be poor. The storage strength is still there because at some point in time, you know what you did with your keys. You just can't pull that information up. Does this make sense? Can you see the differences? So the idea here, basically what I'm trying to get before we get on too much longer, is that you could have information in your head because you've studied it. The idea is that going back to learning and how you memorize it, if you just sit at the table and learn, say, the state capitals on flashcards at the kitchen table, your retrieval strength for doing that is going to be really, really good. Trying to pull the names of the state capitals when you're out in the car, when you're doing something else, when you're any place else but at the kitchen table with flashcards is going to be very, very poor. So, and I've said at other times, when you're trying to learn something that you really, really want to remember, do it in different places at different times and in different circumstances so that you've got different cues around you, because it's more likely that you'll be able to pull something up with those different cues than when you're only learning something that's got that one cue with the flashcards at the kitchen table. So if you've ever had those memories and something's come up and it's like, why did I remember that? Where did that come from? Something in your environment gave you that cue because you're remembering it there. but you're not going to remember someplace else because it's not the same environment and not the same cue. So that the retrieval issue, if you're trying to bring information back, you need to, well, that you don't need to, but it would really help if you could pull up a different set of retrieval cues so that when you did try to pull something up, you'd have a different set of cues that you could rely on instead of just one, and you're not in that particular set of circumstances. I hope that helped, or I hope that made sense, and I hope that was useful. If you've ever tried to do something and remember something and you couldn't, try this, just study it in different ways and see if you can get different cues, not just the kitchen table, but outside wandering around the block, in a park or something like that, and see what you can do. And it might take a while, but ultimately you'll be able to pull that information up easier than trying to sit there and scratch your head saying, I know it's in here, where is it? Okay. So I hope this was helpful. I just realized how long this was. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to have it be that long. But if it was meaningful to you, please share it if you think it'll be meaningful to somebody else. And I will just shut up now and we'll let you go and we'll chat with you later. Bye.